Hey, it's Michael Dermer here, and in this lesson we're going to talk about how to create a standard process for trying to raise money. You know, one of the things that happens when you're in the busy days of running a business and you've got to raise capital, you feel like every time you go to an investor meeting, you're running around with a chicken with your head cut off, trying to create materials, try to create structure, and it eats every part of your day. So we're going to talk about how do you actually create a standard process for investment to make that much more efficient. So what do we mean by trying to create a standard investment process? You know, what we're really trying to do is to create something that is efficient and repeatable, okay? And so first comes to the materials that you need. And we talk about this in another one of the lessons in this course. The materials that, let's assume that you're going to develop these. They're the executive summary, there's your investor pitch deck, your PowerPoint presentation, frequently asked questions, you've created a data room, you've created a list of references. Okay, so let's assume, and I know that's a lot of work, but let's assume that you have those materials. What is the standard process that you're going to use to put those materials to life? Okay, step one. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to give investors the basic information about your company, right? And that basic information is going to be your executive summary as well as your general investor pitch deck. You know, because remember, really all you're trying to do at this point is to get to the next step, which is to get a meeting with the investor to go and determine whether it's worth further exploring. You're not trying to get them to close an investment or commit to an investment rather right away. You're just trying to pique their interest. And they see, sophisticated investors, whether they're angels or venture capital or others, they see lots and lots and lots of investment pitches. And so the executive summary, which is usually a page or two, and a PowerPoint presentation of 10 to 15 slides is more than enough to be able to wet their whistle. If you can't communicate your value in those documents, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to raise money. So first is distribute your executive summary and distribute your general presentation. Okay. The next step of the process is the investors are going to review those materials and they're going to determine whether they're interested in taking the next step or not. And let's say, for example, they come back to you at that point. When they come back to you at that point, you want to be able to have a standard way to respond. So when they come back to you and say, listen, we'd like to get some more information, here's what you want to be able to do. You want to be able to say, okay, great, we've got our frequently asked questions document, right? And a frequently asked questions document, as we explained in another lesson, is the top 10 or 15 questions in all the different areas of the business. And so you can say, when they start asking about sales and marketing and customers and technology like they normally will, you say, hey, I know you had those particular questions, but let me give you the frequently asked questions document. Okay, that lays out a lot. That goes hand in hand with your data room, right? So if you've created a data room with all of your relevant documents and information, right, you can simply point them to that data room. And one of the ways you get that data room organized is around the categories that are typically used in what they call a due diligence request. And a due diligence request is basically a long request from an investor that says, here are all the different documents we want and information we want about your company. So as you can imagine, it covers all the major areas of your company. So you can structure your data room around those types of requests, okay? So in addition to the frequently asked questions, in addition to the data room, you're going to pass along at this point your financial model. Your financial model is kind of that detailed model which shows when they make an investment, here's how the business is going to perform. Here's how you're going to generate revenue. Here's the expenses that are going to come. Here's what's going to happen to your asset and liabilities, and here's what's going to happen to your cash flow over time. Okay? So the investor comes back and says, I'd like to learn more. You're going to send them FAQs, you're going to send them to your data room, and you're going to send them your financial model. At that point, an investor is going to say, wow, I really think you have an interesting business, and I think there's some opportunity. We want to learn more. We'd like to have a meeting. Okay? And one of the things that can help you a lot with respect to these meetings, they could be very open-ended. You could have you and your team or your advisors run around and prepare every time. Remember, most investors want to know the same things all the time. So create a standard agenda for that meeting, right? And that standard agenda is basically going to walk them through the different components that you have in your executive summary and in your PowerPoint presentation. And you can create a structured process for that meeting. So when they say, hey, we'd like to have a meeting, a great response is terrific. We've got a standard agenda and layout for that meeting that we're going to provide to you. Take a look at it. It should cover everything. Certainly, if you want to add something, that's great, but we've structured and organized it for you. So what does that do for you? Number one, it shows that you're organized, right? Number two, it gives investors most of what they need. They might add a little bit here or there, right? But it allows you to get your documents and your materials and even your training organized around that agenda. So let's say you've just got a couple of team members and they've never been involved in the investment process before. If you know you're going to run the same meeting structure, you can train your team around the different pieces of structure because you're not making it up every time. Imagine if an investor came to you and the investor said, well, here's what I'd like to cover, here's my agenda. And you had to reorder everything that you're doing. I mean, that's not what you want to do. You want to basically say, hey, listen, we have our act together. We understand this is what it takes to raise money. Here's the agenda for the meeting. Even if an investor pushes back a little bit, what you can do is push back and say, listen, we've structured it. I think we're happy to accommodate additional information you'd want to have, but we think we've really, really covered everything. And one final thing I want to leave you with, we talk about this structured process. I've got materials. They take a lot to create, but once you have them, right? You create your materials. You distribute these materials, as we said before, the general materials first, followed by the detailed materials. You have a standard agenda that creates structure to the way you're doing things. But then we mentioned briefly about training, okay? And in the beginning, you may have a very small team, a team that's not raised money before. Training is incredibly important. So what you use that standard agenda for is also a mechanism to train your team around the key messages that you want to deliver within that structured agenda. Okay? Raising money is an incredibly complicated and time-consuming process. But what I can tell you is if you create these materials and use this standard process over and over again, it won't feel like you're reinventing the wheel every single time. And you will also give the impression to investors that you really have your act together. And that is an indication not only of how you're going to raise money, but also how you're going to run the business going forward. There's a lot more detail around each of these elements that I discussed here side by side with this video and this lesson.